everyone. I'm Shauna.
I'm Sarah.
Trey.
I'm Charity.
I'm Jada.
And welcome to Serial Talk, where you get to see real talk. And oatmeal talk. Welcome to episode 6. We are so excited. We're going to talk about gender roles this time and all that entails. And so without further ado, we're just going to kick it off and get started and have these ladies introduce themselves. So Trey, I will kick it to you.
Hi, I'm Trey Smith, and I have been at North Atlanta for 18 years. And I've worked in the church office as a ministry assistant for the last 7 years, almost 8 years. I have 3 children that have grown up at North Atlanta, one who is still in our student ministry. And so I'm happy to be with y'all today to talk about gender roles as I've seen them play out in my life, as well as the lives of my children and grandchild.
Yeah, so my husband Thomas and I have been at North Atlanta for 16 years, I think. We have a daughter who is 6 and a son who just turned 8. So we are an evenly split household in terms of men, women, boys, and girls. So I just get a very interesting perspective on gender roles in my household, much less my professional and the rest of my personal life. So I'm excited to chat with you ladies about that today and hear what your thoughts are as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Jada. I've been at North Atlanta for like 4 or 5 years. I'm a little baby. I am a student at Harvard and I study sociology, so I'm really excited to talk today.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. We're so excited. So let's jump into question 1. What do you think of when you think of gender roles? Like, let's start out baseline, everybody on the same page. Let's define this. Let's kind of get a understanding or status quo around what we're talking about in the future questions. So just to kind of get everyone up to speed, set the foundation for the rest of the conversation.
Okay, so I'm up first. And when I think of gender roles, the visual that I have is a box. So it's just sort of a box that's a defined space. And I'm sorry, I took a couple notes so that I won't forget. So it's just a space where you're really not allowed to be or to dream outside of that confined area. So that's kind of just how it's played out for me. But also that means that you can't really possibly grow. You can't grow or stretch to meet the role that God has given you because you're stuck in that box. So ultimately, your growth is stunted. You can't, until you can find a way to break free from that box, you can't grow. I also never really relate gender roles to spirit led. Like those two that role doesn't go together for me. I feel like a gender role that's assigned to you is more stifling and doesn't allow for the freedom that is spirit led. Anything that God's calling is going to offer much more freedom, and so that's kind of it for me. It's just that role kind of just confines me to a box.
Yeah, I agree with you, Trey, on that. And I think of gender roles as a kind of a predetermined structure for your life before you're even born, right? So you don't even have many options outside of that because the culture or society that you're born into has already constructed a box or some kind of a format for you based on your gender, which is different from, of course, sex, which is a biological term, which is you're woven into the womb a certain sex, right? But a gender is a cultural construct that, for some can be binding, and for others, depending on your culture and your gender, can be liberating. And it really is kind of, the luck of the draw. You don't really get a choice. And if you stray outside of those gender roles or those gender norms, it is the job, right, of society to pull you back into that, because society depends on everyone sticking to the rules, right? So that's kind of what I think of when I think of gender roles and how they operate in society, and how they kind of construct a path for human beings whenever they're born. So yeah.
I really love the box metaphor. That's such a good example. And I also really like the word format, because when I was thinking of like what are gender roles and how I want to talk about this, I was kind of really just thinking of like the way that people should or like are expected to act based on their gender. So really it's just like, I think of it as more of like a path that you should follow. Format's a good word, I think. And a lot of times I feel like people really think about gender roles like mainly in like the family structure, like, oh, like dad's gonna go like make the money and mom will cook. And like it can, gender roles are also really important in like every other aspect of life. Like they're there, even though people pretty much only think about them in the family.
So I find it really interesting because for me, I think gender roles function a little bit like stereotypes, right? Like they're designed to minimize the need to think about certain things, right? Like men do this, boys do this, girls do this, women act this way. And it's kind of lazy, I feel, because it doesn't force you to analyze each person as the individual that they are. You meet someone, you automatically presume to know something about them, or you hear a sentence that talks about somebody engaging in a certain activity and you automatically presume what gender they are. So I think it kind of dumbs down society, because we're not taking the time to think about people as individuals instead of just presuming how people are supposed to behave. So I think those parameters are really important because they can have positive and negative consequences. And that is part of the second question. How have gender roles been helpful or harmful to you specifically in your personal or professional life?
So for me, um, it's probably been more harmful than helpful. You know how some help just hurts. So that's been the case for me. Um, being in roles, especially being in roles that were limited, like to specific tasks. So the main reason for that would be the fact that I'm pretty introverted. So I'm usually not the first one that's gonna like jump into the spotlight. So it's real easy for me to go, oh, okay, well, so that's all you expect of me. Then I'm gonna stay right here in this spot, and I will women are excluded from that anyway, so whatever task or position that I wasn't expected to do, I could very easily step back and go, okay, where can I find my space, where can I find a place where I feel like I'm serving or I'm being helpful, and I just will ignore the fact that I really could do that other thing if I were allowed to. I'm just gonna. And so that ultimately has been more harmful to me than helpful, because I stayed in that box, which means my growth was stunted. I didn't have experience in certain areas. And then when I actually would have an opportunity and be called to do something, I had no idea how to go about doing it. And so I would then, doubt myself. If I felt like God was pulling me in a certain direction and wanting me to do something, I would feel completely unprepared and even worse, undeserving of whatever it was, because I would go, no, 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 like not you. You don't know how to do that. You don't have any experience in that. And so it was like perfect opportunity for Satan to kind of get in there and go, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that. And so, but it was really just the fact that I had not, um, I had not exercised those muscles. But, fortunately, the more I grew spiritually, and the more I kind of leaned into the things that I felt like God was calling me to do, um, the the more I kind of pushed back on that. And so what I thought was like okay with me early on became real suffocating as I tried to do things, because of course, just because you decide you want to make a change doesn't mean that everybody around you is going to be on board with that. So when you've allowed yourself to stay in those little confines, it's a little upsetting for people when you start changing the rules on them. And things that you would only say to them, you decide you want to speak for yourself and say those things. It's like, no, that there's a lot of pushback on that as well. So that just kind of added to a lot of the anxiety that I had when I would say yes to something and then like freak out. It's like, okay, how are you going to do that? Like, did you actually say yes to that? And try to talk myself out of it. And um, so yeah, so it's been a long kind of struggle and a tug of war for me of having that box and knowing that the easy way is to kind of stay in it, and then pushing myself to step out of my own comfort zone and into what I feel like God's calling me to do. So yeah, it can just be, I think, Charity mentioned that it's kind of predetermined what you're gonna do. And it's just so harmful to have these rules that are set up, and then you don't really dream outside of what's expected of you and what other people have told you that you are. And so yeah, so for me it's been a constant battle to kind of push that aside and not worry about what society says I'm supposed to be, what anyone says I'm supposed to be, and just kind of take a moment, take that time, be prayerful about it, and figure out who I think God is calling me to be.
That was really great, Trey. Um, I think one of the things for me is that living with certain expectations based on my gender. I mean, we could be all night talking about the ways that that's kind of challenged us and harmed us and helped us. I think for me, I felt a squeeze, right? As I have grown to understand that I have a right to choose my own path and choose my own destiny and choose who I want to be and choose if I want to wear pointy high heel shoes or not, or if I want to wear stockings or not. I mean, it's just like little things, right? That they all pile into this box, right? And they all become who you're expected to be. So I am going out into the world with this mindset of, I am going to determine my own destiny, so to speak, and not conform to gender roles, but I'm walking out into a society that has these expectations of me still. So I just kind of feel a squeeze a lot of the time, right? Especially as women, because we have, say professionally, doors have opened up for us quite a bit, right? But there's still the weight of our expected gender role weighing on us. So it's not that we've had, that those expectations lifted. They're still there, but we are also going out into a world where we want to be liberated of that a bit. And it's just, I just feel like a squeeze and like a confusion sometimes, because I just don't think we have the support of society in the way that we need to at this point, right? We don't have the support of society in making sure we have proper healthcare choices, and that people are listening to us, and that we have control over our bodies, and that, we have the support to make sure that our children are cared for if we choose to have a job outside of the home. We don't have all that support, so we still have to figure all of that out. And so that's kind of where I am in terms of, how I feel right now personally, just kind of affected by gender norms and gender roles. And, having a son and a daughter, I have that conflict too, because as much as, and I mean, I'm a feminist, I'm raising two little feminists, I'm married to a feminist, right? I still see us having settled into normal gender roles. And how do I explain that to my children in a way that that makes sense to their little 6 and 8-year-old selves, right? So that, yes, this is how we do it, but this is why we do it this way. And I'm having to think myself, okay, so why do we do it this way? Like, right? And sometimes it's just easier. Sometimes it's just easier to be like, go ask daddy to fix that. I don't want to fix that right now. I don't want to figure out how to fix that, right? Sometimes it's just easier for me to just like, here, let me just get this laundry and take it in here, because I'm the one who's going to fold it the way I want it folded, right? But, right? But then what does that say to my children, right, about what the roles are? And they've already started to speak up in ways that make me realize that they're watching, that they're listening. And so as we are women moving forward in breaking gender boundaries and crossing these gender roles, we're still pulled back into them, and we're having to navigate that not only within ourselves, but within our family. So, and that's just really challenging. I think, it will get better with each generation, but that's just where we are right now.
Yeah, I love when you were talking about a squeeze, because that's such a good word for what I was trying to explain, how I felt in like my early childhood, thinking about like what oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you're like, I don't know, I'm like 10, but you're like, you have like your doctor and your nurse, which is like your man and your woman, you know what I mean? And other jobs like that you see in your like little kid storybooks. And I think that's just such a big indicator of like what you're showing children. But like now in my life, like obviously I didn't realize that when I was like 10 or whatever, but thinking about like gender roles now, I hope he doesn't get mad at me for saying this, but me and my boyfriend have been dating for like almost a year now. And it's funny because like I love weightlifting and like working out, and I'm like super like loud, and he's like quiet. He's gonna like play the piano. And it's like, it's just so funny watching how different my life has been in this relationship. If you had asked me when I was like 15 or 16, you're like, oh, my man's gonna be big and strong. Like, it's just like, you don't have to do that if you don't want to. And I think it's funny because it's almost like the exact opposite. And so as you were saying, like expectations about like the way that like men and women should act, it's like it can be very limiting, because if I had kept that mentality, I wouldn't be in the relationship that I'm in today that I love. So it's kind of interesting to think about the way that you have to unpack that for yourself to really like open up those doors.
Yeah, I definitely have a similar experience, Jada. For those of you who know my husband, he is very quiet, and I am the outspoken one and the one who wants to get up in front of everyone and do all the things. But he's the one that was expected to his entire life and was given the opportunities to his entire life. And that's an interesting, we've talked about this a few times, like the dissonance between, well, that's what I'm called to and he's not. So why does he get all these opportunities and I don't? And that's that's kind of there's a tension there. I mean, not between the two of us, but internally, like, why is this something that I'm having to fight for that he's handed and doesn't want? Um, that's hard. And that's really a challenge. I mean, that's specifically, I think, within the church world, but also professionally at times. And that's really hard. And, even within our Catalyst team, like Derek, Brian, and I having similar qualities, but I'm put in a different bucket than they are at times. And that's not our full team, but historically speaking, when it was the three of us, that was a challenge that we had, is that my roles were seen differently than theirs, even though we felt like we were all on the same team, if that makes sense, doing the same work for the same reason. But I was put in this other one, like, well, you can do the planning and you're good at this, and why don't you handle this? And it's like, but wait, I want that. Like, I think I'd be really good at that, but why do only Derek and Brian get to do that at big church on the stage? Like, that's not fair. So that is really, it's really hard. It's a heavy burden. I say this every single episode. This is heavy. It is heavy to carry, and women are having to carry it around every day in every aspect. And we talked about this a ton in the prior episode about professionalism that you should go watch right now. And because there's so many layers, and this is so complicated, and it's incredibly more, I think, I would say it's more illegal at work than we could say it is at church, but it's still happening. And it's really hard to maneuver through it and figure out what to do about it. And I wrote down, Trey, when you were talking, and I want people to hear this. So, like, let's take a moment, because if you are not like paying attention up until now, I need you to listen right now. Don't confuse the lack of exposure with an inability to do it, because I think that's where we lose the confidence, is because you feel like, because Austin got asked to do communion at age 7 in front of the whole church, and no one's ever asked me to do it, that I can't. And that's not true. I can do it. I did do it I did do it one Sunday. But I think that's the problem, right? We are not necessarily building people's foundations up the way that other people's foundations are being built. And if there's no one to pull you along, you feel like you're still on the sand, right? And you don't have this like solid ground to stand on, to feel confident, to be able to say, yeah, I can do that, because you can. It's just that you haven't been exposed to that. And I want everyone to hear that. Like, it's a lack of exposure. It is not an inability. If you feel called to that, if you feel like it's something you can do, then you can. Just because you haven't before doesn't mean you can't right now. And I think that is, Trey, to your point, that is what Satan just takes a hold of, is, well, no one's ever done it before. What makes you think you can do it? You've never even seen it, and that's a lie. And unfortunately, I think it's a lie that women are, as we talked about in the prior episode, the coup of Satan, right? The coup of Satan is that he uses this against women specifically, and it just kind of perpetuates, Charity, like you were saying, perpetuates into just rotating through this over and over and over again. So,
and I'll say,
yeah.
Back to Sarah's point about just it being lazy. I mean, it's so easy. I can understand why, I don't know how far this goes back, but I can understand why it's easier as a society to just like give roles to people based on certain, aspects, right? That way we can make sure everything gets done, everything gets covered. We've got somebody to go hunt, we've got somebody to gather, we've got somebody to take care of the whatever. I can get why that was an easy way to do it, right? But I don't know if it's the best way, because it doesn't allow for the full experience of everybody, for the full skills, for the full talents of everyone to be expressed in that society. And it's a detriment to men also. I mean, if men are not allowed to, fulfill whatever their desires would be outside of their traditional gender roles, that's a detriment to them as well. So I think it's incumbent upon everyone to take a look at this. We are limiting our boys as much as we're limiting our girls, I think, in this. And in that, we are limiting ourselves as a society. We are, tying a hand behind our back, if you will, because we're not allowing everyone to fulfill their life to their fullest potential. So I think I can understand, gender roles, the importance they have, but if they're rigid and inflexible, and if people are more than discouraged to go outside of those norms, then that's a problem.
So I am really fascinated by this conversation because I didn't grow up feeling limited by gender roles. And I wonder if that's a function of growing up with a single parent. So my mother raised me and my two brothers. So it wasn't mom does this, dad does this, like mom did everything. And because I was the only girl, I grew up more involved with typical boy stuff, playing football and hiking through the woods and, tennis shoes and sweatpants. And it wasn't until I went to college that it became apparent that I needed to soften my dress, my talk, just my outward expression in a way that it never really fazed me as I was growing up. And even when we got married, and I've been married now for 12 years, I kind of like picked and chose which gender roles were gonna work best for me. Like my husband does all the cooking. He's a much better cook because he gets more practice, but it wasn't something that I ever really had a desire to do. I like to consume the food. I don't want to wait for the food to cook. So, but like yard work, that's all you, babe. You yard work, bugs, please come get the bugs. But there was not an expectation early on in our marriage. I will say, to Charity's point, I think a lot of women's role in the professional scene has to do with childcare, because both of my employers had company sponsored childcare, a daycare that they had a relationship with, where if you worked here, you could send your kids here, usually for a discounted price. And that just made that aspect of my life something I didn't have to think of. Whereas now in quarantine, it has certainly affected my ability to work more so than my husband's. And so we have had to have conversations about that and how are we going to make this work, because it has just naturally fallen more on me because of the nature of his job versus the nature of mine. Mine is more documents that I can generate, whereas his is more phone calls all day, every day. So I don't know. I wonder how I would have been affected with gender roles if I had grown up in a home with both of my parents, and if seeing their interaction would have made me feel limited in one way or another. A lot of it, I think, has to do with just my personality. I've never really been one to follow rules. That got me into some trouble as I was growing up. I find that like it's driving me crazy with my daughters, but I try to just like allow that a little bit because I know how that translates into womanhood as they develop, But I have never felt the squeeze. I really haven't. It's just like, if that's what I want to do, I'm gonna do it. And I don't really care if you don't like it. And it wasn't until I became a parent and had to balance work and parenthood that gender roles, I think, affected me a little bit differently.
That's interesting because I hadn't thought about that part of it, Sarah. I also grew up in a single parent home. And so my mom, we did everything. So if you needed to move some furniture, you needed to figure out how to move it. So she was like, no one's going to move it for you. So we had like all our techniques for fixing things, for moving things. And so, but I think the difference is I was definitely a rule follower. So I could leave that space. And then if someone said, okay, so now in this space, this is what you are, then it was like, okay, I'll fit into that. I still feel like my personality played a lot into it, in that I was introverted. And so it was easy for me to hide. I've always wondered what it would have been like if I hadn't been, if that wasn't my personality, if I would have been so quick to follow those rules, because I followed them because they benefited me. I didn't want to do it anyway. So it was like, okay, you don't want me to do that, then I'll go do this behind the scenes thing. And so you may feel like you're limiting me, but I don't feel limited because I don't really want to do that. So, and then also to Shauna, you mentioned specifically like the church and the roles that you wanted to lean into versus the roles that were just sort of laid out for the men. And that really prompted me to think exactly what Charity brought up, in that that's like so harmful to men, because every man that's given to doesn't want it. And so I grew up in Church of Christ, where, at a certain age, boys are just expected to preach. Like, you're going to get your practice time in. And I remember like being like glad I was not, because I did not want to get up front like that. And because I had friends who I knew that was not what they wanted to do. Like, they would be seriously stressing out. And of course, I had female friends who would have loved to have been able to get up and do that. And so yeah, just like it does a disservice to everybody all around, because you're holding back those who have that gift and pushing those forward who don't, and just traumatizing people who like can't wait for their opportunity to get away from there. And so, in both ways, because like how many women wanted to speak and knew they couldn't do it in that setting. And so once they turned 18 and didn't have mom and dad making them go to church, went somewhere where they could use that gift. And how many men, boys that you have that suffer through it until they can get away from it, because that's not what they go somewhere where they can have some peace and do whatever it is that God's calling them to do. So it just really doesn't help on either end.
And gender is a social construct, and it's, that's all it is, because there are plenty of strong matriarchal societies, right? And the women do it, right? And they get it done. And wow, what is it about those women's biological makeup that allow them to do it? Nothing, right? It's just the social construct. There are, societies and cultures where there's more than two genders. There are 3 gender options. There are 4 or 5 gender options. We have just decided that, these are the binary choices, you're male or female, and this is what you got to choose from. And it is just made up based on, what I think, honestly, like, we needed somebody to be in control, right? Somebody needed to have the power so that everybody else could fall in line and we could have some order in society. But we've taken that way too far. And now it disadvantages really everybody in that way. But we've made up this idea of, masculinity, femininity in the way that our society sees it, because other cultures don't do it that way. And, they still function as a society.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because part of what we talked about in the professionalism episode, which you should all go watch, was kind of that this is all kind of goes back to the system, right? And Sarah and Trey, to your point, like, I also was in a single parent household, and I felt very empowered, and I still do kind of within my home. But at the end of the day, like Charity said, I'm still stepping out into this society built around, and that's where I'm supposed to stay. And that's where my tension comes in a lot is, sorry, you know what I'm saying? Going out into a society that's saying this is the box, like Trey's talking about the box. And we were even talking about last episode, that, women get maternity leave, but men don't get maternity leave. And the fight for custody is just like default to the mom, regardless, as if men can't handle children, and kind of like giving them an out of like, well, you can't be a parent by yourself. Hello. But why? Like, why are we saying that men can't? I mean, I'm not saying all men can be great single parents. I don't think all women could be great single parents either. So like, why is it just this default? And I'm kind of speaking out of turn a little bit because obviously I'm not a lawyer or anything in that space, but it's my understanding the default is to the mom. And where did that come from and why? And it's just this idea again that it's impacting the men too. Like, we're setting men up to be incapable of doing these roles because we're saying that's only for a woman, and that's harmful. And why? And for what? So that was an interesting kind of sidebar there of this, how I feel at home and where I feel what's placed on me kind of externally in other spaces, especially I think at church, but at work. And then the kind of the system that's set up around us is just like this fall in line mentality of you go here and you go here, and there's no in between, like Charity's saying. There's no give or take. It's just black and white, and this is very easy. And I think people are far too complicated for a system like that.
One example of that I think about is like, if whatever, the kids go out and like they got food on their face, hair is like all over crazy, they look like, nobody's gonna be like, that dad, whew, nobody's gonna be like, he better get on it. No matter what kind of gender role flipping we do in the house, as soon as we step out, we've got the judgment and expectations of our societal gender roles just slapping us in the face. And that's kind of the tension that I was speaking to, like you were saying, Shauna. It's just we're still in that kind of gray space. We want it to be a gray space, but it's still so black and white. That we're getting there, but it's still not quite there. I'm like, your mama didn't wash your face, right? You know what I mean? So, yeah.
So this is interesting because that made me think of something, and I have to be honest with myself and with you all. So when I was interviewing for my current job, I was very pregnant, and I told the person with whom I was interviewing that this was my fourth child. And I wanted to make sure he knew that because, just so there are no secrets between us. But also I felt the need to explain that my family would not interfere with my job. And I had career goals that I wanted to accomplish and that I was determined to make a reality. But it was almost like I needed to provide comfort to him that I could handle both. And so that makes me think that as much as I want to say, oh, gender roles don't matter to me, I grew up and didn't have those expectations put on me, so I just broke all the rules. Not quite. I learned how to massage the rules, right? But I still know that the rules are there. And so it still affected me because I can guarantee, well, I mean, no man would be 9 months pregnant and showing, but I don't think that a man would walk into any interview and explain what his family life looked like. He would just be talking about, his background and his skill set and his ability to do the job. But one of the things I wanted to make sure I communicated was, this is what I have going on in my personal life. These are my goals for society. The two are not mutually exclusive, but just so you know, I have these two different, but also competing forces in my life. So I think that does go to show that even though I'm trying to get out of the box, I still am maneuvering around the box as best I can.
That's so funny
It's
that you
funny.
said that. Oh, sorry. Okay. I was just thinking about when you said the men going to interviews and talking about their like family life, that would probably, in my mind, almost be seen as like a positive, like, oh, he cares about his family so much. Like, but then if like my mom's going to an interview, like, oh, my kids, they're probably like, yikes, she cares about her family too much. Like, so it's just so funny that you brought that up because that made me think of that.
So I was thinking that it was interesting that the interviewer is not allowed to ask you that question, Sarah, in an interview, but you felt compelled to give them that information, to share that information. So it just kind of goes to show that even though, there are these legal protections in place, we as women are still trying to figure out and maneuver our way, massage, right, the roles to make sure that, that our potential employer knows, our capabilities and our priorities and that kind of thing, which wouldn't cross a man's mind, right? Even though we can't be asked that question, we still feel compelled to give that information.
I'm sure we all have these types of stories, so feel free to share as you feel willing. But we had like these mentor assignments at work, and I got assigned a gentleman not in my group. He was not my manager. He had no impact on my career outside that he was supposed to be just a mentor, help coach me into mentor type things. And I can remember like maybe our second time meeting, he was telling me how his wife stays home, and in so many words told me that, that's an option I should consider if I ever have kids. And I was like, wait one moment. And I really didn't know how to process it. It was just, okay. Just like, and kind of followed up with like, that's the woman's place at home. And it was just like, he was very similar in age to me. And it wasn't just some like older person who you would expect to have kind of these traditional values. And it was just totally, and I found out later he was pretty avidly involved in a church. So that kind of, I put two and two together there. But just kind of an extension of prior conversations we had of how the church impacts society and, perpetuates these problems, which we'll get into in a minute. But it just was alarming to me. Like, you are supposed to be my mentor. Why'd you sign up to be a mentor if you don't think I should be here? And if this space is not for me, why do you want to mentor me? Where are you trying to mentor me to? If you are like checking my baby clock and like you're about to go. So what is this relationship? And I kind of stopped following up with him. He didn't really like it that much. Well, I would like avoid him in the hallways, and he would see me and be like, hey, are we gonna like get together? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's just so busy. And in reality, I was just like, I have nothing to say to you anymore. And I probably should have acknowledged it and like confronted it a little bit more, but it just at that point was like, for what? Like, I don't work with him. I can avoid him as much as I possibly can. And, eventually switch jobs after that. So, I knew I was kind of like on the verge of leaving anyway, but I just was so alarmed that he signed up to be a mentor and then basically told me that my place was not there. And it just was, this is not okay. You should not be allowed to have these expectations of people around you. It's okay if that's what you decide as a family. Like, you guys are all in on this. That's what you decided. It works for you. Totally cool. No judgment here. But you can't project that onto somebody else and expect them to fall in line with how you feel. That's not okay.
And I mean, just think about how it would feel to have those roles reversed. Like, if every time a family decides to grow, like the expectation was for the men to stop working. You know what I mean? Like, regardless of what your career goals were, regardless of what you had accomplished so far, like, oh, well, that train is it's done now. You need to come on into the home and get ready to burp and change diapers and feed bottles. That's ridiculous. But yet and still, that's the expectation of women. The reception that I got at my current job when I told my manager I was pregnant, she literally screamed. She grabbed her co-manager and she said, "We're having a baby." And her excitement, just like, I was so relieved that I wouldn't be stifled and limited just by growing my family. But I, it would be humorous to me to see society for just like a day if men had that same response to making an announcement about their families growing, because the way it plays out with women in the workforce is just, it's beyond me. But this was discussed a lot more in depth in the last episode on professionalism. So if you have not seen it, make sure you go and check it out.
I have a similar story, Sarah. I probably waited like way too long to say anything to anybody at the office, and I was clearly pregnant, but I didn't, like, I just knew the moment I said it, like everything was going to change. So I did not say anything, and they were like, like, "You're obviously pregnant," but nobody wanted to say anything. But when I did, it was great. But it made me think of another negative impact of these rigid gender roles, and that is that it just can be very divisive if you choose to go a different path than what the norm for your gender is. You catch it from those of your gender, those of the other opposite gender. You catch it from everyone, and it sets up people to just it sets up a lot of judgment, sets up a lot of really hard feelings, and I think it pits us against each other in a way that just does not even have to be. It really doesn't.
Yeah, going off of Charity's point, I wanted to say, like, the opposite side of this coin with gender roles. I feel like if you're like a woman who doesn't want to have kids, or like chooses not or can't, you're kind of frowned upon like by society. Like, oh, why? Like, you should, or this, or you're like, if you can't, like, that's a problem. And I just want to say, like, gender roles in that instance are very damaging, especially like it's none of people's business, first of all. And just in the sense that, like, a lot of times women's value is kind of like, I don't want to say, like, I guess I will, it's just kind of like tied to like family life, which, like, it doesn't need to be, it doesn't have to be, it's not, like, that's just like a very important aspect for like women who don't have kids, can't have kids, or whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean, who was that? Martin Luther, who was basically like, women should be, like, I'm paraphrasing, but barefoot and pregnant, and if they die as a result, like, oh well, that's what they were here for anyway, right? So I mean, if you've got somebody like Martin Luther, like, out there setting up those societal expectations of gender, I mean, it's no wonder why it's lasted this long and is so hard to break down, right?
And the crazy part about that is the way society is structured, that follows you for your whole life. So if a 20-year-old, 30-year-old decides, I don't want to have children, then the 60, 70-year-old is still judged because of it. So because people will assume when you're at an age where all of your peers, those who chose to have children, have grandchildren, then if you don't have grandchildren, that is frowned upon. You are judged because, like, well, what were you doing? Like, why didn't you have kids? And who's going to take care of you when you're old? And, like, you don't outlive that, I guess is my point, which is nuts. So you make the decision and you're okay with your decision, and you live your whole life with society judging you for it, like, to the grave. They're still like, oh, okay, well, you're going to end up in a nursing home because who's going to take care of you? As if you can't have 10 kids and still end up in a nursing home. Like, that is not how it works. But yeah, it's crazy. I mean, I have friends who go through this through every stage of their lives. And it's just it's so frustrating.
That
And if
I never thought about it from that perspective. I never thought about older women being judged for not having grandchildren. Or yeah, that's interesting. It's just it's sad, I guess, that so much of the value in a woman is placed on her reproductive organs and what she chooses to do or not do with them. It kind of goes back to episode 3 on hypersexualization, which if you have not checked it out, you should. But it's like we cannot separate women as individuals from their collective body parts. And, it's like we discussed previously about, older men who aren't married and don't have children. They're the bachelor, they're the George Clooney's of the world. But if you're 35 and you don't want to have kids, you have to constantly explain to people and to have that question asked of you. I don't know how there has to be a really good clap back for that question that we all need to just start saying, regardless if we have kids or not, if we want kids or don't, if we can or we can't, like just one hard clap back that every woman needs to say anytime somebody asks them about their families, and it's none of their business. Like Jada said, it is none of your business.
Interestingly enough, the next 2 episodes are actually covering a lot of this, or maybe not next 2, but 2 later in the season, we will have an episode around, it's called To Mom or Not to Mom, and just all of the judgment that comes with whatever you pick. You could adopt, you can wait to conceive, you can do IVF, you could not have kids. It doesn't matter. There's just all of the judgment, all of the ways, and we'll talk through the implications of that. And then we have another episode about relationships, and if you choose to be single, or what happens if you get divorced, just like all of it. What if you wait until, like, whatever you decide, there's just rain down the judgment, because it just doesn't go away. And that is damaging. And I think that it's not specific to women. I mean, these are problems across the board, and we say this every episode, and it's true. Like, this is hurting you too if you are not a woman. This is not just isolated to the impact of what's happening to women. Men are impacted too. And I think where I want to shift the conversation to is, like, why is the church should be talking about this? And I know we talked a little bit about, like, within the walls of the church why it's important, but why should the church be talking about, like, societal gender norms or gender roles, and how we are perceived in society within the walls of the church? Because we talk so much about church and the world being separate, and so what does this look like? Why do we need to be talking about this? Why should the church care? Why should the church engage?
So I feel like the answer to this question, because you've asked it in other episodes, I feel like the answer is always the same. When we're discussing any kind of change, whether we want to see it take place in society or where, if the church isn't talking about it, then we can't expect anyone to follow us. Like, if we want to be leaders, then we got to get out ahead of something. And so that's kind of the biggest thing for me, is just us being the example and modeling the behavior and setting the standard, versus society trying to change and then judging, Christians or the church for their slow movement. And also those in the church, specifically our young people who are looking at us and waiting to see what the church is going to do. So if we want to create a space that feels safe for them, in a space where they can grow, then that should be like the biggest motivation of all. So I mean, especially just dealing with the group of young people that we have right now, like that, do as I say, not as I do, that is not gonna fly for this generation. It hasn't. I mean, it didn't fly for a lot of us, but we sort of snuck off. It's like, you know, as soon as I get a certain age, I'm just gonna dip, and then maybe I'll come back when I have kids. And you know, I'm proud of this generation for like not even going there. It's just like, we're up front. This is what we expect of you. We are not trying to hide it. You can step up, or we're going elsewhere, or we're going nowhere. And so, I mean, I love the church, and, I raise my children in the church. I want to see them raise their children in the church. But I just know that if we don't start practicing what we preach, then that we are not going to hold on to this generation, and certainly not Generation Z, which my youngest is. Like, we can really forget it with that. Like, we may hold the millennials a little bit, but Generation Z, they are not going to deal with it. And I know North Atlanta is moving in the right direction. But I have a front seat view, working in the office and being a part of ministry, of just how difficult that is. And it can be, we have our work cut out for us. It can be really disheartening sometimes, but I'm just really praying that we continue to push, and just, continue to encourage each other to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's where our growth is going to take place. And yeah, we need to be, the church has to talk about it. We should always be the first ones to talk about it. We should be setting the standard. We should be showing others what it's like to be Christ in the world. We're talking about in the world. We got to be it in the church first, because they're looking. And so yeah.
I can tell you, I mean, Gen Alpha is not buying it either, because I get questions from my 6-year-old. I was like, wait, well, what? Now explain this to me. So yeah, they're not buying what's being sold either. But for me, the importance of the church being involved in this discussion is kind of pretty simple. I mean, we talk about gender roles and the box metaphor, right? And how they are limiting the potential of people in society. And so it's one thing for my gender role, or that expectation, to limit, my professional options or my family options. But for my gender to limit my spiritual options, my spiritual life, that's a whole other story. And the implications are much, much larger. And I think that is, for me, like the linchpin. That is what the church needs to be thinking about, because you are not, when you, it's not just about what my role is in the church. It is about my ownership of my own faith, my ability to live out my calling, and that has enormous implications for my life here and in the hereafter.
Yeah, this whole conversation has more or less been the way that gender roles have like influenced our lives negatively. And all of us are pretty much regular churchgoers. So I think that if we're not talking about gender roles in the church, where are we going to talk about them? Like, this is supposed to be the place that like we're coming together, community with God, and like really like getting to the core of like what life is supposed to be like. And if we're not talking about like all the hurt that's happening there, then like it's not gonna get better. So like the church needs to talk about this, because there is harm being done, whether like on accident. This is important for the church to talk about, because when there's harm being done, whether on purpose or just by the way that the church is situated in society, it's not going to get remedied if we're not talking about it. So
And I think, like, on the path to inclusion, owning your impact is a part of that. And it is irrelevant what your intention is. And so I think, Jada, to your point, like owning the impact of what has been historically happening is an incredibly important part of the reconciliation process that needs to happen, whether it be racially or for genders. Like that reconciliation isn't complete without a recognition of the impact.
Totally agree. It's like healing a wound that you haven't, the knife is still in the back. First, you got to take the knife out, then you can apply the medication, then the wound can heal. So, certainly a conversation that I hope we continue to engage in the church with the aim of making differences. I mean, talk is great, action is better. So what about final thoughts? Is there anything that you've been thinking and wanted to say but haven't said yet, or something just popped into your mind? Is there any parting words of wisdom you ladies want to share with our listening audience?
I think just specifically kind of putting it out there for our younger generations, and what it's like to try to function in the church right now. So just kind of still along the lines of why should the church be addressing this? I guess what I want to speak to is why should the younger generations even give the church a chance? And that's just the more we kind of try to progress, like the more you start digging, the more you see things that you uncover things that you couldn't even see before. It's like you got to start growing before you can even kind of have clarity on it. And it can be really disheartening again, because you feel like it's like quicksand. Like the more you try to, it's like sludge, the more you try to move, the slower it seems to be. You uncover this and you uncover that. It's like you're fighting a losing battle. And so, but, it's just kind of the necessary steps to growth. And so I just, I'm just prayerful that we can all kind of work in this together, because it does take everyone, the young and the old, the men, women, everyone. If we're going to see any real change, it's going to have to be something that everybody does. So I went to Tuba City last year, 8th grade mission trip, Tuba City. And one part of the trip, it's a whole team building exercise. The whole week is phenomenal for students before they go into high school ministry. But one of the big aspects of that trip is this hiking. You hike in the Grand Canyon. So you go into it, you go into it at like 7 a.m. It's like a 5-hour hike. But the biggest thing about it is that you cannot get out of that canyon without everybody working together. Like you can kind of get into it, you can slide down some hills and you can do some things or some rocks, but when it's time to come up out of it, you have to have other people pull you up. And so just watching the whole dynamic of it, you people are reminding each other to drink water. You're encouraging each other when you need encouragement yourself. But it's just a lot of really working together in order to get out of that canyon and get out of it pretty quickly, because you're trying to get out of there before that sun hits high peak and you get cooked in the canyon. So it's just, but that's what this really reminds me of, in that if we all kind of do our part and like have that goal and know where we're headed, and we all pull in together, then we can kind of make it through what really seems like this huge thing that we're never going to get around. And this just like feels that way for gender, for race relations, for like all of the things that we're kind of coming into right now. It's like society, like we're in the church in particular, like it's a reckoning, and we are at this point, and if we don't all work together, it feels like we're not going to get to the other side of it. So just encouraging, just encouraging our catalysts, our young adults to, get some perspective. Talk to your parents, talk to, if not your parents, someone your parents' age, talk to your grandparents, get their perspective, not necessarily to change their thoughts, but to see why they think the way they do, to see what their life was like, to get an understanding for why they are the way they are, why they make the decisions that they make. I just feel like what we're in is like the biggest team building exercise ever. And we can all grow if we do all kind of just do our part. So
And I think the grace to help people along. I know I have been extended a ton of grace, and that has been greatly appreciated, because I'm not there, and there's a lot of people helping me get there. And yeah, to your point, Trey, we've got to do this together and try not to be hard on, try to extend grace as much as you need grace, I guess.
I think if we as a church can kind of look at gender roles and just take a chisel, I think we could probably take an axe to anything that is not in the scriptures, anything that's not, called for by Jesus. If we can just work to rid ourselves of that, I think we will be closer to one, what God has called us to be, and that there is no male or female, right, in heaven. And two, we can have that on earth, right? We can be closer to being one, and we can get rid of the male-female dichotomy of, this is what it means to be this, and this is what it means to be that. Because like I mentioned earlier, obviously gender is a social construct, a cultural construct, and societies evolve and change and are fluid. So why would also gender not be fluid? We know that it is in different societies, it's applied in different ways. So for us to force people into certain boxes, male, female, whatever, I think is doing another disservice to all of us. I think, like I said, in other cultures, there are more than one gender, and it's normal. I think that as we chisel away at those things that are not in the scriptures that define, who we are as men and women, we will get closer to seeing that that there's space for people who are not identifying as male or female specifically, but people who are just open to being who God has made them to be. And why would we not love that and accept that and encourage that in each other?
Well said. And I really, really like the idea of life as a team building exercise. That really stuck with me, Trey. Now, the idea of being in a canyon, trying to climb out before the sun reaches overhead, I'm not looking forward to that 8th grade mission trip, but conceptually, the idea of working together to get from one place to another is a great way to think about life. And, when you are with a group trying to make it out of the canyon, you're not looking at the next person that you want to help out and saying to yourself, well, is this person male or female or gay or straight or black or white? It's just they're on the team and we're trying to get the whole team out of the canyon together. And to Charity's point, you know, we all are who God made us. And the more that we can just accept that for what it is and allow people to grow in their spirituality and reach the full potential that God has put into them, I think the more we're going to see society flourish, because everybody is contributing in their own way. And I think that that's the ultimate goal, right?
Yeah, I think we have to let go of that fear that if someone doesn't conform the way we expect them to conform, that society is just going to collapse. I think we need to restructure society to allow for everyone to be who they were meant to be, instead of making everyone conform to this rigid structure of society's gender norms, whatever.
Well, I just want to thank you all again for the insight and the wisdom and the thought-provoking ideas that we shared on this episode today. I've left here with, I guess, a better understanding of the way that I have played into the gender roles in my own life, even though I thought I didn't. But there they are. Like I can see them now and better understand ways to not put those same sort of limitations and expectations on my own children, and to teach them how not to put those limitations and expectations of those around them. And to your point, Trey, and yours, Charity, you know, we have to, if our church is going to continue to grow and flourish, we have to figure out how to maintain the engagement and the dedication of the people who are coming behind us. A church is going to grow in its membership or it's not. And I know that one of the things that is important to me as a parent is to pass down my understanding of God and the love that God has for us to the next generation. So this conversation, I think, is timely and very important. And I really appreciate you, Trey, and you, Charity, and you, Jada, for helping all of us think about this differently and be prepared to have conversations about this going forward. So next Wednesday at 9 o'clock, we are going to have a Zoom call. Our viewers are welcome to participate. That information will be put up on Instagram and Facebook and wherever else we put this information so that you can call in and join us in this conversation. Thank you all for watching. We've loved having you with us. Tune in for the next episode of Serial Talk and have a great night. Bye.